Hello, I am Misty Winckler from Simply Convivial, and today I'm here with Brandy Vencel of Afterthoughts, and we are going to talk about educational principles and how they're really practical. We tend to separate the philosophy and principles from what we do day to day, and it's easy to wonder, how do the two go together? But Brandy and I both think that the principles really are a very practical thing to think through and have ironed out as much, we do that more and more as we go along. So we're going to have a conversation today about how principles are practical in our day-to-day lives and day-to-day homeschooling. So Brandy has written a study guide to study Charlotte Mason's 20 principles. And so, Brandy, do you want to tell us a little bit about your book?
Sure. I don't know that it was that much of an original thought, but I was leading a group through, I guess it took about 2 years because we didn't meet every single month. But I was leading them through a study of Charlotte Mason's 20 principles. When we had a group that wanted to study her, and we were trying to think about, what's the most efficient way to study her, because she wrote 6 volumes. It's worth reading them all, but it would take a very long time for a book group to get through all 6 volumes. So we decided to use her 20 principles instead. She puts them in the front of each of her books. Well, I think the first one, she only had 18 when she wrote that or something. But anyway, so as I was designing that study, I was keeping it and then refining it. And so at the end, I thought, I bet other people are doing this too, and we might as well just make it public, make it available so that every group leader that wants to do a 20 principle study doesn't have to sit down and reinvent the wheel, because I think it's a pretty basic thing to do in the sense that she gives us her 20 principles, and her works are online, so we can search for where she wrote about each of them. And so I just put it all together, and I put it into a curriculum form with a few sample conversation starters, I guess questions we could say, to discuss that kind of thing. And so now there's a lot of groups reading it, and that's exciting to me.
That's fun.
Because it's one of my favorite things. I know you like principles. I love principles, so that's exciting. Yeah, it's been great fun.
It is, well, and the Charlotte Mason's 20 principles really kind of distill everything down. They aren't, if you just take 20 principles, and it's not very long, if you take just the principles, and then you have the extra reading material to flesh them out. But it's like a shortcut to, how to do education, really.
Right. Well, and what I love is because she wrote so much, her principles are all mixed up with her practices, and so it's nice to see what she thought were the essentials. So, these things over here are the essentials, and these are the ways she chose to apply those things. And I think her applications were great, but it is nice to see her differentiating between the two. And so, when she gives her list of 20 principles, it doesn't include every single thing that Charlotte Mason educators do. It's like those things are founded on these principle things. So I love that, because that gives us, I think, possibilities for innovation, right? Because we can learn to apply those principles in other ways in our own time. So that's kind of fun too.
Yeah, so I asked you to pick 3 principles for us to talk about today. So 3 principles that kind of inform day-to-day decisions. So you want to introduce the first principle that you picked?
Sure. Well, funny enough, it's not a Charlotte Mason principle, but I think she would have liked it. But and you and I have talked about this principle before, but it's John Hodges' principle, exposure breeds taste. And that's just one of my personal favorites. I heard him speak about this in a recorded Cersei talk. I don't know. I mean, that's a long time ago now. I mean, I'm feeling like maybe it was almost 7 years ago or something. Oh, I feel like my oldest was very young. It's been a long time. But anyway, so that's one of my favorites, and I just kind of rest in that, I think, because we can't do everything, and exposure covers so much. So, I don't know, you asked me to think of an example of how we apply it. And so one of the things I came up with for our family was gardening, actually, because when my children were young, I definitely exposed them to gardening. It wasn't gardening done well by any means. So we had horrible soil, and I was like always pregnant or nursing or whatever. I was in that stage when we were doing it. So really, I guess I would say it was my oldest two children that got this initial exposure. But we did plant a garden and install a garden every year. Now, we didn't really maintain it very well, and I can't even say that we had much of a harvest because our soil was so bad, and I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I kill houseplants. I am really, like, I do not have a green thumb at all. But it's been interesting because that was when my little guy, some of that was when my oldest guy was 4, or so. I mean, he was really small, and we did that for a number of years. And so then, I don't know, a couple of years ago, I was having some health issues, and I just felt like, I can't do a garden. I just can't. I can't add anything more to my plate this year. So what I did was I took him outside, and I asked him if he would like this plot of land. It was where I would have put my garden if I was going to put one in. And he was all over it because of I think, his early exposure. It's the only thing but he took it more seriously, and he's better at it than I am. And so now we're at 3 years later, almost. All 4 of the kids have a garden, and they all work together, and they plant and plan, and I buy seeds and starts for them. They tell me what they want. But they have a full garden that actually grows food, and I actually cook the food, and I do nothing. And it's amazing. But I really think it all goes back to the early exposure. I mean, it was it G.K. Chesterton who said whatever is worth doing badly? Yep. I was doing badly, like totally doing it badly. But it wasn't for lack of zeal. I was just not very good at it, I guess. And I just see it now all bearing fruit, really, like literally bearing fruit. Tomatoes. But it's been wonderful, and I feel like I wonder how many things we'll see as our kids grow up and come into adulthood of things that, we did that kind of exposure where it was just very... Right.
Yeah, very natural. Doesn't have to be something that's a lesson plan, all plotted out and, perfectly executed. It's just, these are the kinds of things that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. But do you have an example?
Yeah, we were talking about it, and I thought of classical music for us, I guess. We, like composer study, that's a thing, but that's the thing that I failed at. It just did. It's easy to get it shoved aside, or to figure out how to put the pieces together and make it happen. It's just kind of, it's not a normal, or it's not something that I figured out. Mm-hmm. But I said, well, what I can do is just play classical music, and so I did my own simplified version of composer study, which was just playing the music. Like so during chore time, so it's a time that's already happening, people are doing things. I picked one composer for a term, and we just listened to pieces from the one composer, Bach or Vivaldi or whoever, over and over for a term, and that was it. I just turned it on. Sometimes I would say, "This is Vivaldi." And that was it. We didn't do. Sometimes I got a library book that was a biography, and we might have read it, but for the most part, I just played it, and that was it. And not even every day. There were stretches where I forgot and that sort of thing. But then it was funny because years later, then my boys were given a radio by their great-grandfather, an old radio, which I realized they had no idea what a radio was. So they plugged it in, and they're like, "Look, you can if you move this, you can find different things are playing. Where is it coming from?"
That is hilarious.
So they're figuring out how to tune a radio, and they come to the classical music station, and that's where they landed. And they said, oh, yeah, that's just what they then were attracted to, because that's what they knew that was familiar. And they don't. Classical music to them is just normal music. It's just what we listen to, and it's just kind of funny that it didn't take a whole. That's not even that much exposure, really. It's just little bits over a long time.
Little drops of water.
Yes. Exactly.
I always think of that as Cindy Rollins' poem. I don't know who wrote it because I can't think of it in my head. But no, I just love. I feel like I can rest in that I can do these bits of and I do think, when we say exposure breeds taste, I think about it in regard to food. So with some kids, when you're introducing a food, 3 tastes and they're sold on it, versus with other kids, it's like 100 and then it becomes tolerable to them. It's something that they will do without complaining. And so I feel like that. I mean, that's true in other areas, and so it's not completely magical. It's not like a sure thing every time. But I don't know about you. I was looking back on areas where I feel like I don't have any taste, and I would say those are the rare areas where I had 0 exposure as a child. My only exposure was in adulthood, like camping. So my family never camped. And so I can't figure out why people go and work hard in the wilderness. I understand.
I totally get it. Yep.
Hiking. And I feel somewhat ashamed of saying that, because I know that that's probably a good thing, especially for a family with more than 2 children to do, because hotels get expensive once you max out the occupancy rate. I don't know. Some other states aren't picky about that, but in California, they're like, you need another room. Because you have more than 2 kids, you need another room. So it's expensive. Safety. Yes, right. Yes, because it is so dangerous to have a baby, person in the room. Anyway, so, but I just don't, I can't even imagine camping, because I did it once as an adult, and it was okay, but there were we were in a group, so there were all these people doing all the stuff I didn't know how to do. And so I was sort of like the guest. Wasn't quite like staying at a hotel, but I didn't have to fumble around not knowing what I was doing, or like make a fire, or I don't know. Anyway, I feel so lame even saying this. But I was thinking that I do think that some of it is just that lack of exposure during those critical ages when, I don't know, imagination is formed, really, because part of it, I can't imagine myself doing it because I don't know what it looks like, which is kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and doesn't Charlotte Mason have something where she says something like that children need to experience something, or at least be exposed and have a taste for it to grow into interest later. Like if you just plant little seeds when they're children, like then it grows into something. It's like, is that the firstborn affinities, or?
Yeah, so I was going to say it's almost getting into our last principle.
Oh, okay. Well, I won't cheat.
But no, I do. I mean, I do think it goes together, and I don't know. Do you have anything you weren't exposed to that you feel like is a big? I'm trying to think about it.
Yeah, if I had thought about it beforehand, I'm sure I would have lots of examples.
Sorry, I probably should have brought this up beforehand. It's like cheating.
Although I think a lot of times with this homeschoolers, we have that as far as what even homeschooling looks like as a homeschool mom. You know, I'm a second generation homeschooler, and I do see that when I'm talking to other moms who went to public school, and they just aren't sure what to do because they don't know what it looks like. And so it takes a lot longer to kind of figure out that this kind of day-to-day messy life is, this is what it is, this is okay. Yeah. And
Yeah,
And
that
I
totally
couldn't
makes
do
sense.
school at home because I was never in a classroom. So I don't even know what that looks like.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I do know that it seems like some of the moms I know that have had the hardest time making the transition were ones that went to teachers college to become teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like this constant struggle. Some of the women that are in my local book group and things, they'll just say, like, I'm just trying to get all this out of my head. Like, I know that, I mean, well, it's great to be able to manage a crowd. They know that so much of it is specific to having a large group of people and isn't necessary at home, but making that transition because what they were exposed to in terms of education, they were trained and had things drilled into them for years, and it's hard to make the
Mm-hmm.
transition and know what applies to which situation. That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
All right. So how about education is a discipline?
Yes. Number two. Okay, so this is when Charlotte Mason said that, she meant the discipline of habit. And so, I mean, I think a lot of us, we do talk about habits, like we need to have good habits. And so the habits of things like having our children have a morning routine or any of that kind of stuff. But I was thinking kind of along the lines of how habit is just such a helpful tool in general. And I'm trying to see what I had said was my example, but I think that habits prevent bickering once they are routine. So I was thinking about this, like I've had people, I won't name any names, ask me about narration and things like, well, is a child fighting you on narration? I'm not naming names. But and I really had to think about that. Like, why is narration just not a big deal at my house? Because it's not that I don't have children that are willful or push back or I mean, it's not. I don't have magic kids or something like that. And the only conclusion I could come to is because that's just how we've always done things. Like sort of how you were saying, you don't have to get school at home out of your head because you never were in a classroom.
Mm-hmm.
I think for my kids, because it just happened to be that I studied a bit of Charlotte Mason before we started school and knew enough that I knew I wanted to implement her principles. And so we started with narration on day one of first grade with the oldest child. And so it's something we've always done. And so the oldest had, but some of the younger kids, I feel like I didn't even really have to train them because they've watched it. So I mean, I've had to train them in the sense of training their attention to be able to grasp longer bits of information. So we do have to move from maybe paragraphs forward to getting to chapters or something like that. But like with my oldest, I had to even train him in what is narration because he had never seen it done. I had never done it before. But I feel like with the others, just this habit of watching the older children narrate, to them that's just what we do. It's just a habit. So there's no real fighting over narration because that's just what's done,
Mm-hmm.
which comes in handy, really. I don't know. So I don't know if you have an example, but I know for me those kinds of things I just feel like there's just no fighting because it's just what we do.
Yeah. And I know for a while earlier, earlier on, several years ago, we would have kind of more pushback and problems getting circle time going in the morning, and but sticking with it and kind of getting past that and making it normal and making it no, we are going to do this, and working out those things to make it easier to start because starting is often the hardest part. But
Yeah.
so getting going easier, then the more you do it, then now it's just people just grab their binders and sit down. But it does take a lot of time and work to get through to habit.
Yeah. Well,
But
I feel like you're sort of the habit expert with all of your organizational stuff. And every time I'm trying to form a habit, I just go back and read something that you wrote that tells me that I just haven't stuck with it long enough, and that's what my problem is.
Exactly. So I have to keep writing about, no, you have to keep doing it longer. 3 times
Yep.
is not enough to make a
Yeah.
habit.
Wouldn't that be nice if that would happen? Oh, that would just be so nice. I was thinking, I even, and I've told you this before, but I even, to speak of it as something that prevents bickering, I assign seats in my car. And then sometimes they get to switch, like we'll move. But because I just got tired of this whole, and it wasn't even like a particular seat they're fighting over. I think it's like they're just fighting just to fight. And
Mm-hmm.
so I sort of figured out, who can handle sitting next to whom without, I don't know, pulling their hair or whatever. Um, and, but I mean, it was just so much nicer to leave the house and
Yeah.
not have an argument about who was going to sit where in the car. Of course, now I have the issue that someone's old enough to sit next to me in the passenger seat. Like,
Yes.
2 people are
My
big enough.
my oldest, well, in Washington you have to be 12 before you can sit in the front. So I have
Oh.
someone counting down the days till his birthday.
See, what's going to be hard is when you have 2. Because that's
Yes.
what recently happened to me is that my second born is now big enough to sit, because ours it's more like a size thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm back to trying to figure out how can I assign this while letting them take turns. But I don't want to have to like keep tally marks of who. I don't know.
I know.
Anyway.
Yeah. I remember that from being that age myself, and me and my brother.
Ah, calling shotgun.
Yep.
Totally. Oh my gosh, so true.
So do you have any tips on working on habits, and especially for a school day and keeping that up?
Oh, my biggest tip is for young moms, and that is nip it in the bud. Like the very first time we see something that is, if it's going to be, and sometimes it's hard because you have to think like a prophet. Like, is this going to drive me insane in 2 years from now? If this keeps happening every day, and it's hard sometimes to realize that this thing that happened this one day could become that problem in 2 years. Um, but I feel like some of the struggles we went through early on, and so part of that's just like we're all using our oldest child as a guinea pig, right? So it's just learning from experience. But I feel like so many of the things that weren't habits were because, or became bad habits. It was because I didn't recognize that almost anything can become a habit, and that lots of times our habits are formed by default. If we're not trying to forge that path of like the good habit, then sometimes the bad habit happens accidentally. It just,
Yeah.
I think I had in my mind, I think maybe I associated bad habits with sin too much
Oh.
instead of just things that could be detrimental. And so I nipped things that were obviously morally wrong, like lying or something, in the bud. But I didn't necessarily nip in the bud little things that would make our day just run more smoothly. And yet, when you're trying to manage people, really, the easiest thing is to set the good habit from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, got a little bit stricter with my younger children for early on. Not so much now, but just trying to not make those same mistakes. Because undoing a habit, I think, is just so much harder
It's a
than,
lot harder. It's a lot
yeah.
harder.
And does it take more time? I haven't read a whole lot of the psychology of habits, but I feel like it takes more time than the, I don't know, maybe it just feels that way because it's a fight the whole time. Does it take more time to
Well, I
undo
think
it?
sometimes we try to break habits as like stopping doing it, and what we really need to do is replace habits. So
Yeah.
not think about just quitting, but replacing, and that's a better tactic.
Yeah. And of course, then there's always the art of trying to choose what to replace it with. I think
Finding
sometimes
something
that can be a challenge.
fits and works.
I know one thing that Charlotte Mason advised also was, like, when you're going to break a bad habit, to try to form a mother-child team. So it's not
Yeah.
me versus you, and I'm going to make you do this thing, but to try to come together and say, this right here is a problem. and I'm going to be your helper. I'm going to help you break this habit and form a good one. And I haven't always been good about doing that, but I think the few times that I have been, it's been a really powerful thing, because now I'm their ally instead of their, it almost feels like an enemy when I set myself up against them. And some children are a little easier to get on board than others. but
That was
when it works
for us. Yeah. Just even I remember reading that at one point and realizing that's our problem here with kind of that adversarial feeling is, I'm bossing when I need to be coming alongside and helping. And it can be a pretty subtle difference.
Yeah, that's true. I know.
But habit requires us to be on the ball, which I think is probably the hardest part. Habit is a lot of making those habits is a lot of work on the mom's part. Being consistent, and I think consistency in forming habits has been my biggest problem.
Habit is a sprint, but really it's that marathon. I mean, that's another thing I've learned from Charlotte Mason, is she talks about maybe the most important step is guarding the habit at the end. And I think that's where I've dropped the ball a number of times, is we went through all of this work and then I didn't do the guarding part. And so we lost the good habit that we had worked so hard to build. But that's the marathon part, right? The sprint is like that 30 days or however many, we're going to use to build this habit. But then the marathon is, and now you have to guard it for the rest of your entire life.
You have to keep doing it. Yeah. Yep.
Man. But it is. I know. It's worth it, though, I think, because I think about the chaos that would be in my home. I mean, we have enough chaos without having the chaos that would come from all of the good habits we do have not being there, or being bad habits instead. And I just think, I should just be grateful that God has showed us these truths, because it could be worse.
those times, like newborn, the sleepless, those little periods where the habits are, a lot of them just go out of the window, and then seeing, oh, this is what it's like without, like, actually we weren't doing so bad as like now. Let's get back on that bandwagon. But
yeah,
yep,
absolutely.
So education is the science of relations was the third one that you picked.
I love that one. I was trying. I thought I was going to read the whole thing. Let me see. I think I have it up on my computer here. I do. Here we go. It's her, what is it? Her 12th one. So she says, education is the science of relations. That is, that a child has natural relations with a vast number of things and thoughts. So we train him upon physical exercises, nature lore, handicrafts, science and art, and upon many living books. For we know that our business is not to teach him all about anything, but to help him to make valid as many as may be of those firstborn affinities that fit our new existence to existing things.
Yeah, I think that does kind of relate back to the exposure breeds taste in a way. That these are little seeds that are being planted that make, and making connections, and that later they can grow more and more because they've kind of made them their own.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I know for me, I think a big thing that I've gotten out of this is this idea of being broad and generous in our reading, and it's something I've been writing about more on the blog lately, because it's really come home to me. Even if I'm only offering some of this in free reading time or something, but just not being so narrow in what I offer them, because they're supposed to have these relations with all sorts of things. And if you think about it, it's like this world that that God made, and all of the components are important, right? So we're like, what is, I mean, it kind of goes back to the idea of ordo amoris, right? And the cultivating of the affections. And so there's all these things to love. And it's, but I don't know about you, but I feel like sometimes that the hard part is for us because we didn't learn the planting seeds part, but then there's also um, this idea that the student builds a relationship not just with those things, but between those things. So they're making these connections across disciplines, across subjects, that kind of thing. I think that's what Karen Glass called synthetic knowledge in her book, which I feel like in her book that possibly the most important chapter because she put it together so well, and I just never had really thought it all through before. I mean, I'm reading it again actually right now because I still feel like my brain hasn't completely wrapped itself around this. But so this whole idea of like reading all these different or planting all these seeds at the same time then allows for, oh, we could use the gardening analogy almost because then it's like we're cross-pollinating, right?
Ooh, nice.
That's kind of exciting.
It reminds me of Andrew Pudwa tells a story in one of his lectures. I don't remember which one it is, but they homeschooled, and he tells a story that one time one of his daughters, it was 10 o'clock in the morning, prime homeschooling time, and his daughter was just sitting on the couch, not doing anything. So he said, why are you just sitting around? Shouldn't you be doing something? And he said that she had just this kind of dreamy expression on her face, and she said, I don't know, things are just kind of connecting up in my brain.
Oh my gosh,
that's a good thing to have happen. It's not always doing something, but having those things, just thinking, having time to think and process is really important.
Having time for Scalay.
Yes.
Yeah. But sometimes I think that that's the benefit, and I shouldn't say the benefit, but part of the benefit of more of an emphasis on being out in nature, just because it slows us down and we tend to be more quiet and there's this time for reflection. Because when we're at home, I think a lot of us, I know I do, feel this pressure to do. We need to do something. And if I'm really cranky, then I need to be able to see it. And not just in me and other people that are around me. And so I don't know, that going outside, it's kind of quieting to us, too. I don't know. I know with the synthetic relationships, so this putting maybe unlike things together and making a connection between them, I learned to ask the question after narration. Not that I do this after every narration, because I think that would probably lessen it. Who was it? It was Lee Capehart who taught me to ask this question, but it was, does that we just read about remind you of anything else? And so it's sort of like it's not forcing any particular connection, but it's giving them the opportunity to make a connection. And what's always been fascinating about that is that often when I ask that question, something has specifically reminded me of something else, which is what reminded me to ask the question. And so then I'm all excited, trying not to just force my connections on someone else. So I ask the question, thinking that, of course, they'll make the connection that I made. And most of the time, they don't, but their connection is equally fascinating to me. And so it's just, I love asking that question because it's just so I don't know. It's amazing how our brains work and how it's so personal. The learning is so personal,
Yeah.
I think.
It seems like that could be tricky in making sure they don't feel like you are asking them for us. Like, I'm thinking of something. Have you thought of a connection? Like, making them feel like I should be thinking of, you know, at, um, is there like a certain way that you ask the question to where they don't feel like there's a particular answer they're supposed to be giving, or
I
did you?
think what I've tried to do is just be okay if they say no.
Yeah.
Asked it a couple times. And I just, and it's hard, but I try to not say, well, it reminded me of, because then they feel like they got it wrong, maybe.
Right.
Versus if they have this great answer, then I don't mind sharing, well, it reminded me of this over here. And then we can, marvel at how the two things we were reminded of are actually like each other also,
Yeah.
So it's like a little triangle. But I feel like that's one thing that I've learned is to just be comfortable with there not being an answer. So I feel like sometimes I'm ready for that kind of a conversation, and I feel like they should be too, but they're not, and just let it go.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. And one thing that I've tried to remind myself of is that sometimes those connections don't happen right at the moment where we're talking about it, and to be okay with pausing whatever it is I'm doing when they come up with, Mom, what does this mean? Or is this like this, when it's, dinner making time or laundry folding time. The connections often don't happen, on cue or on schedule, and to just let things bleed into every day.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. And into their play too.
Yes.
Bleeds into their play. That's what's always interesting to me is how, especially really little ones, in their real early elementary,
I'm trying to think.
Maybe acting out 2 books at once or something.
Last week, my kids were outside playing, and we just saw them making this heap of weeds. The weeds are up now, and so they had this heap of greenery. And we're like, what are they doing out there? And they came in, we're playing Peter Rabbit, and so and so is Mr. McGregor, and then you could look and see, oh, look at those. Okay, those ones are bunnies.
That is so cute. Aww.
And then my bigger boys, it's starting to come out less in their, outdoor type play, but more in, they want to draw in the evening or something, and they'll, well, they're always drawing airplanes or battleships or whatever, but they'll be, if they were reading about, the Greeks, then they'll be drawing Greek ships, and if they were reading about World War II, it'll be World War II airplanes.
That's really neat. I was noticing that for next year, and I don't know if it was for this year and I just didn't notice it, but we use Amblesite Online, and I was looking through the stuff for year 8 today because I was going shopping for books. But I noticed that it said to assign an illustration once a week.
Oh.
And I don't know if I was supposed to be doing that this year, and I just haven't. But I was sort of wondering, because it's very open-ended. It's not of any particular book. It's sort of like, it looked like the kind of thing I could just put on the list of, sometime this week, illustrate something that you read. And I think it'll be interesting to see what comes out.
Yeah.
My list doesn't do a whole lot of drawing outside of nature drawing. So it'll be interesting, I think, to incorporate that a little bit. And it does seem like I think drawing's a different kind of a connection with things than
well, it's kind of that doing things by hand idea, where it takes a lot of time, so it slows you down.
It's sort of like a meditation or something, a little more active, but trying to see here. We got one here. I was looking at our list to make sure we didn't miss anything.
I think this is where it says, this comes full circle.
Yes, I think so. Well, and it really does. I mean, you made the connection already, but that idea of exposure breeding taste, um, so it's the second half of the principle where it talks about these firstborn affinities. She's quoting a poem, and I don't even remember who it's by. I don't know if you do, but it's a quote from some larger work. But this idea that we're born into this world with an interest that's kind of like latent, but it has to be awakened. And she doesn't say that's where exposure comes in, but I think it is. I think it's that kind of thing. And little kids are so excited about just about everything, and so it's really like capitalizing on that time in life. I don't know. I'm really, as my kids are getting older, I'm really tempted to say that the critical ages are before age 10. I don't know what you think about that. I don't know. It's just something I've been thinking about lately. I feel like I'm seeing a transition, probably that starts at age 10. Like I wouldn't say, the switch turns off at age 10 or something. But I'm just seeing, now that we've had a 10-year-old more than one time, I'm like, maybe I'm seeing a pattern here of things changing, and I don't know. I'm trying to remember how old your children are. Have you one 10-year-old or two?
Oh, only one. My second will be 10 next month. So we're almost.
So you can tell us in a few months what you think.
So in saying that, you mean because in the pre-10, you're just kind of opening those doors of interest that then start? Nope.
I guess I feel like those are really receptive ages, and after that, it's a little bit harder. And I think maybe that's why I'm thinking about questions that I get in my email and that kind of thing, why it seems like transitioning older children from the classroom to the homeschool is so much harder. And it seems like it's about fourth grade where that becomes harder. And fourth grade, of course, is usually the year when kids are turning 10. And as I've been thinking about it more and observing my own children, I feel like it's just those younger ages, they're still just that wide-eyed, exuberant, and open to so much. And at 10, it's a maturing thing, too. I mean, there's a lot of, I don't know, it sounds... I feel like I'm being kind of negative about it, and it's not that I don't like the age of 10, but I think there's a transition there, and they're kind of deepening some things they already have, but they're a little more wary of new ideas and new experiences. And I'm definitely seeing that more as now we're heading towards the teen years, and there's even a little bit more of, because we're going to have a teenager in a couple months, and we're seeing more of that kind of... Losing your light there.
Yeah. It's motion sensor light, so I was like, oh, go on.
That's a good idea, actually. So, I don't know. So I don't know if I'm right about that, but it's just something I've been observing, and so I feel like that really broad, touching on lots of things and focusing on wonder and exposure and all that stuff. It's not that it's not important in the older ages, because we do. Old dogs do learn new tricks. I don't think it's a complete, but it's harder, and that's why we have the saying. And so I don't know. I just feel like those early elementary years are just that period of reception when they're just so open.
Yeah. You want to capitalize on when they are just wanting things. They're craving more and more information or learning, and to just, throw those doors wide open to look, the world's an interesting place. Look at this and this and this. And they're not going to necessarily remember particular details, like testable details.
Right.
Where they could then pass a test on that subject. They're not going to remember necessarily those details, but they do remember, oh yeah, I like that. Or, oh yeah, I'm interested in that. Oh, that's something that I like.
Yeah. I think you're right. It's so exciting.
It is.
Principles are practical, right?
Interesting and exciting to see them grow and change.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Brandy, for taking the time to talk to me this afternoon, and it's good. So
That's been good. I love thinking through the principles because I feel like we can make such a personal application, so it's the same thing, but it's different in every home. So it provides that unity and diversity all at the same time. And I think that's great because, I don't know, as homeschoolers, sometimes there's that push to be like cookie cutter, or there's the push to just be different for the sake of being different. And so this idea that we can be grounded in something that's, when people like John Hodges and Charlotte Mason, they thought they were discovering natural laws of education. And so, well, John Hodges is dead. I shouldn't talk about him in the past tense like that. Terrible. But, so, anyway. But, just that idea that there are these universal laws, and yet we apply them in our time, in our own families.
Yeah, and different families have different personalities, and your kids have different personalities, so that it doesn't have to look the same in every home to be working toward, traveling the same path or going along in the same direction, but without looking the same.
Yeah. So. That's what I love about it.